My name is Rhett Vossin, and I learned something important about marriage 3 weeks ago. When your wife starts hiding her phone like it contains nuclear launch codes, she's probably not planning your anniversary surprise. I work logistics for Granite State Freight, which means I spend my days tracking shipments, managing inventory, and solving problems that other people create. It's methodical work that requires attention to detail and patience. Skills that, as it turns out, translate surprisingly well to investigating your spouse's suspicious behavior. The first red flag wasn't the late nights at the spa or the sudden interest in personal development workshops. It wasn't even the new wardrobe that appeared without any discussion about our budget. No, the moment I knew something was seriously wrong was when I found Nira doing laundry at 2 in the morning. Nira hasn't touched a washing machine in the 4 years we've lived in this upscale apartment complex in downtown Portland, Maine. She considers housework beneath her, preferring to spend her time cultivating her image as a lifestyle influencer and fitness enthusiast. So when I stumbled to the kitchen for water and heard the washer running, I knew something was off. "Couldn't sleep," she said when I found her in the laundry room, stuffing clothes into the machine with unusual urgency. "Thought I'd catch up on some cleaning." She was wearing designer workout clothes that probably cost more than my weekly salary, her blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun that looked effortlessly perfect. Even at 2 a.m., Nira managed to look like she'd stepped out of a magazine. It was one of the things that had attracted me to her initially, back when I was naive enough to think her perfection was genuine. "Since when do you do laundry?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Since I decided to be more independent," she replied without looking at me. "You're always complaining about household expenses. I thought I'd help out." That's when I saw it. A phone, different from her usual iPhone, buzzing insistently from inside a pair of jeans she was about to wash. The screen lit up with a text notification. "Galen home. Can't wait to see you tomorrow, beautiful." Our eyes met over the washing machine. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then Nira lunged for the phone, but I was faster. Years of grabbing falling packages and catching inventory mistakes had given me quick reflexes. "Give that back," she demanded, her perfectly composed mask slipping for the first time in months. "That's private." I looked at the phone in my hand, then at my wife of 6 years. "Private from your husband?" "It's not what you think," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. It's complicated." I scrolled through the messages quickly, my stomach sinking with each line. Dinner plans, hotel reservations, intimate messages that made it clear this wasn't a new development. This had been going on for months. "Galen Brewster," I said, recognizing the name. "The real estate developer, the one with the townhouse development near the waterfront." Nira's face went pale. "Rhett, please, let me explain." "Explain what? How you've been lying to me for months? How you've been using our money to fund your affair?" She straightened, and suddenly the vulnerable woman was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. "If you ever touch my personal property again, I'll call the police and accuse you of invading my privacy. I have rights, Rhett. Legal rights." The threat hung in the air between us like a challenge. I looked at this woman I'd shared a bed with for 6 years, this person I'd trusted with my heart and my financial future, and felt something cold settle in my chest. "Go ahead," I said simply, handing her the phone. "Call them." She blinked, clearly not expecting that response. What?" "Call the police. Tell them your husband found evidence of your affair and wants to discuss it. I'm sure they'll be very sympathetic." Nira clutched the phone to her chest, her perfectly manicured nails white with tension. "You don't understand the situation you're in, Rhett. I have friends, connections, people who will believe my version of events over yours." I nodded slowly, as if considering her words. "You're probably right. Your social media following alone would give you credibility. All those fitness posts, the charity events, the perfect wife image you've cultivated. Very impressive. She relaxed slightly, mistaking my calm tone for surrender. I'm glad you understand. Now, I think we should both get some sleep and discuss this like adults tomorrow. Absolutely, I agreed. Sleep sounds perfect. You take the bedroom, I'll take the couch. As she walked past me toward our bedroom, I called after her. Oh, and Nira? Sweet dreams. She paused at the doorway, something in my tone making her turn back. But I was already walking toward my laptop, my mind shifting into the same methodical problem-solving mode I used at work. By the time she woke up the next morning, I'd been busy for 6 hours. First, I'd logged into our joint banking accounts and reviewed every transaction from the past 6 months. The pattern was clear once I knew what to look for. Regular transfers to cover someone else's mortgage payments, spa treatments that cost more than our monthly grocery budget, restaurant charges for places I'd never been to, and hotel rooms booked during her supposed girls' weekends. Our savings account, which had contained nearly $40,000 6 months ago, now held less than $8,000. Money I'd earned through overtime shifts and careful budgeting had been systematically drained to fund her new lifestyle. Next, I'd called our bank's customer service line and explained that I suspected fraudulent activity on our accounts. It wasn't technically fraud since her name was on the accounts, but the representative was very helpful in explaining my options for protecting my assets. I learned that, as the primary account holder, I had the right to freeze access and require dual authorization for large withdrawals. Then, I'd contacted our landlord. Our lease was month to month, and I'd been considering a change anyway. The required 30-day notice would put us at the end of next month, giving me time to find my own place. Finally, I'd called our cell phone provider. Since the family plan was in my name and I was the one paying the bills, I had the authority to make changes. Adding parental controls to Nira's line seemed appropriate, given her apparent inability to manage her digital communications responsibly. When Nira emerged from the bedroom at 9 a.m., looking refreshed and confident, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop and a cup of coffee. "Good morning," she said brightly, as if our middle-of-the-night confrontation had never happened. "I've been thinking about our conversation, and I believe we can work through this misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding," I repeated. "Is that what we're calling it?" She poured herself coffee from the machine I'd bought her for Christmas, using the organic, fair trade beans that cost 3 times what regular coffee cost. "Rhett, I know you're hurt, but you have to understand that relationships are complex. Sometimes people need different things at different times." "You're absolutely right," I said, closing my laptop. "For example, right now, I need financial security and honesty. You apparently need to spend our life savings on another man." Her perfect composure cracked slightly. "It's not like that. Galen is going through a difficult time with his business. I was just helping a friend. A friend who sends you good morning texts and books hotel rooms with you. Those messages were taken out of context," she said, but her voice was getting higher, more defensive. "And I never stayed in any hotels. Those charges were for business meetings." I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app. "Let's see. The Eastland Park Hotel, charged to our joint account 3 days ago. $250 for 1 night. Would you like me to call them and ask what kind of business meeting requires an overnight stay?" Nira's face flushed. "You have no right to monitor my spending like that. I'm not your property, Rhett." "You're absolutely correct. You're not my property. But our money is our shared responsibility, and our marriage is supposed to be based on trust." I stood up, gathering my laptop. "Since you've made it clear that both of those things are negotiable, I've made some adjustments." "What kind of adjustments?" I headed toward the door, grabbing my work bag. "Check your phone. Try to buy coffee on your way to the gym. Attempt to access our savings account. You'll figure it out." As I reached the door, she called after me. "Rhett, wait. What did you do?" I turned back to look at her one last time, standing in the kitchen of the apartment we'd shared, wearing clothes that cost more than most people's car payments, surrounded by appliances and furniture that I'd worked overtime to afford. "I took your advice," I said. I called the police. Her face went white. You what? Well, not exactly the police, but I did call several people about protecting myself from fraudulent activity. Turns out, when someone systematically drains shared accounts without the other person's knowledge, there are legal remedies available. I opened the door, then paused. Oh, and Nira? You might want to call Galen. Something tells me he's going to be very interested in your new financial situation. The last thing I heard as I closed the door was the sound of her frantically trying to unlock her phone, followed by a string of words that would have made her yoga instructor very disappointed. The beautiful thing about working in logistics is that you develop a systematic approach to solving problems. When a shipment goes missing, you don't panic or make emotional decisions. You gather data, track patterns, and follow the evidence until you understand exactly what happened and who was responsible. Investigating my wife's affair required the same methodical approach. I started with what I knew. Nira had been systematically draining our accounts to support Galen Brewster's lifestyle. The question was, how deep this went, and who else was involved. My first stop was Kip Morrison, my co-worker and the closest thing I had to a best friend. Kip handled equipment maintenance for our warehouse and had a talent for acquiring information that wasn't technically public record. He also had a refreshingly cynical view of human nature that I was beginning to appreciate more each day. Your wife's been playing house with Galen Brewster? Kip asked when I explained the situation. We were sitting in his cluttered office, surrounded by repair manuals and empty energy drink cans. That explains a lot. What do you mean? Kip leaned back in his chair, which creaked ominously under his weight. My cousin Danny does electrical work for Brewster's developments. Says the guy's been struggling to keep his projects afloat for months. Word is he's been looking for investors with more enthusiasm than business sense. Investors like lonely housewives with access to joint bank accounts? Bingo. Kip opened his laptop and started typing. Danny mentioned something else too. Brewster's got a reputation for mixing business with pleasure. Apparently, he's very good at making women feel special and important while they're writing checks. That piece of information hit me harder than I expected. The idea that Nira wasn't even Galen's only target somehow made the betrayal worse. She wasn't special to him. She was just another mark. I need more information, I said, about Brewster's business, his other relationships, the whole situation. Kip grinned. Lucky for you, I know just the place to get that kind of intel. That evening, Kip took me to Rory's Tavern, a dive bar on the outskirts of downtown that catered to construction workers, city employees, and anyone else who preferred honest drinks over craft cocktails. The owner, Rory Mallon, was a former contractor who'd spent 30 years working on every major project in the city before a back injury forced him into early retirement. Galen Brewster, Rory said when I mentioned the name. He was wiping down glasses behind the bar, his weathered hands moving with practiced efficiency. Now there's a piece of work. You know him? Know of him. Guy's been promising big things for years, but his projects have a way of running over budget and behind schedule. He's got charm, I'll give him that, but charm doesn't pay contractors or suppliers. Rory poured me a beer and leaned against the bar. Word around town is that his waterfront development is in trouble. Permits got delayed, costs went through the roof, and his main investor pulled out last month. He's been scrambling to find new money ever since. New money like what my wife's been giving him? Could be. Brewster's got a type. Successful women who are looking for excitement and don't ask too many questions about where their money goes. He makes them feel like they're part of something important, like they're helping build the future of the city. I thought about Nira's recent enthusiasm for supporting local business and investing in community development. Suddenly, her new vocabulary made perfect sense. There's something else, Rory continued. Brewster's been coming in here with different women over the past few months. Always the same routine, expensive dinner somewhere else, then drinks here to show them how down-to-earth he is. I've seen your wife with him twice. The confirmation stung, but it also provided useful information. Anyone else I might know? Penny Hartwell was here with him a few weeks ago. Blonde, works at that fancy gym downtown. Seemed pretty cozy for a business meeting. Penny Hartwell, Nira's best friend and workout partner. The woman who'd been encouraging Nira's independence and personal growth for months. I finished my beer and left Rory a generous tip. Thanks for the information. Just be careful, he said as I headed for the door. Guys like Brewster don't like it when their cash flow gets interrupted, and women like your wife don't like being embarrassed in public. Over the next few days, I continued gathering intelligence while maintaining my normal routine. At work, I used my access to shipping databases to research Brewster's business dealings. Several of his suppliers had placed his accounts on hold for non-payment, and his construction permits showed multiple violations and delays. At home, I monitored Nira's increasingly desperate attempts to regain access to our accounts. She'd tried calling the bank, visiting branches in person, and even attempting to use her charm on customer service representatives. Each failure made her more frustrated and more careless. She'd also started spending more time on her backup phone, the one I'd discovered in the laundry room. I couldn't access her messages directly, but I could see the pattern of her calls and texts through our shared cloud backup, which she'd apparently forgotten about. The most interesting discovery came when I checked our credit card statements more carefully. In addition to the hotel charges and restaurant bills, there were several payments to something called Hartwell Consulting Services. A quick internet search revealed that Penny had recently registered a business offering lifestyle and relationship coaching. It seemed that Nira's best friend was not only sleeping with the same man, but also getting paid to help facilitate other women's affairs. It was a level of betrayal that would have been impressive if it weren't so disgusting. On Thursday evening, I decided it was time to make my first direct move. Nira had been increasingly hostile since losing access to our accounts, alternating between threats and attempts at manipulation. She'd tried everything from tears to accusations to promises of couples therapy. I've been thinking about our situation, I said, as she came home from another emergency workout session at the gym. She looked tired and stressed, her usual perfect appearance slightly disheveled. Finally, she said, dropping her designer bag on the couch, I was beginning to think you'd lost your mind completely. I've decided you're right about needing independence, I continued. In fact, I think you should have complete independence. She looked suspicious. What does that mean? It means I've found you your own apartment. Small, affordable, perfect for someone starting over. The lease is already signed. Rhett, that's not what I meant. I've also transferred your personal belongings to storage. Don't worry, I was very careful with everything. Your clothes, your workout equipment, your collection of self-help books, everything you'll need for your new independent lifestyle. Nira's face went through several expressions: confusion, anger, disbelief, and finally panic. You can't just kick me out. I have rights. This is my home too. Actually, you're wrong about that. I handed her a folder containing copies of our lease agreement, bank statements, and legal documents. The lease is in my name only. The security deposit came from my account. The furniture was purchased with my credit cards. She flipped through the papers, her hands shaking slightly. This is insane. You can't just erase 6 years of marriage because of a misunderstanding. You're right. I can't erase 6 years, but I can prevent you from destroying what's left of our financial future. I pointed to a specific page in the folder. Those are copies of every transaction you've made in the past 6 months. Hotel rooms, restaurant bills, transfers to Galen's accounts, payments to Penny's consulting business. Would you like to explain any of those to me? Nira stared at the evidence of her deception, and for a moment, I saw something like shame cross her face. Then the mask snapped back into place. Fine, she said, standing up straighter. If that's how you want to play this, I'll call my lawyer. I'll take half of everything you own. You're welcome to try, I said. But you might want to read the prenuptial agreement you signed first, especially the section about asset forfeiture in cases of adultery. The color drained from her face. We don't have a prenup. I smiled for the first time in days. Check page 12 of the folder. As she frantically searched through the papers, I headed toward the bedroom to pack my own bag. I'd be staying in a hotel for a few days while she processed the reality of her situation. "This isn't over, Rhett," she called after me. "I have friends, people who care about me, people who won't let you get away with this." "I'm counting on it," I replied, closing the bedroom door behind me. Phase 1 of my plan was complete. Now it was time to see how Nira's support network would react when they realized their meal ticket had been canceled. The thing about social media influencers is that their entire world exists in public. Every meal, every workout, every moment of their carefully curated lives gets documented and shared with their followers. It's a double-edged sword. The constant attention feeds their ego, but it also means that when things go wrong, everyone gets to watch the collapse in real time. Nira had built her online presence around the image of the perfect wife and lifestyle guru. Her Instagram account, Nira Living Well, featured artfully arranged photos of our apartment, her workout routines, and inspirational quotes about balance and authenticity. The irony wasn't lost on me. What she didn't realize was that I'd been monitoring her social media activity as part of my investigation. Not directly, that would have been too obvious, but through the engagement patterns and location tags that painted a clear picture of her real activities. It was time to let her audience see the authentic Nira. I started small. On Friday morning, I drove to the upscale gym where Nira spent most of her time networking with other affluent women. The wellness center was exactly what you'd expect: sleek equipment, overpriced smoothies, and enough ambient lighting to make everyone look like they belonged in a magazine. "Excuse me," I said to the young woman at the front desk. "I need to update the payment information for my wife's membership. Rhett Vossin." "Of course," she said, pulling up the account. "What's the new card information?" "Actually, I need to cancel the membership entirely. We're going through some financial difficulties." The receptionist looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry to hear that. I'll need Mrs. Vossin to come in personally to cancel, or you'll need written authorization." I handed her a letter I'd prepared. "Here's the authorization. As you can see, it's notarized." As she processed the cancellation, I noticed Penny Hartwell across the gym leading a small group of women through what looked like a very expensive personal training session. She spotted me and immediately ended the session, walking over with the kind of predatory smile that made my skin crawl. "Rhett," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I heard you and Nira are going through a rough patch. I want you to know that I'm here for both of you." "That's very generous," I replied, "especially considering how much you've already done for our marriage." Her smile faltered slightly. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Hartwell Consulting Services," I said, watching her face carefully. "Interesting business model. Do all your clients pay through their husbands' credit cards?" Penny's face went pale, then flushed red. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "I don't think so, but I appreciate your concern for our marriage. It shows real dedication to your friendship with Nira." I left her standing there, knowing that within hours she'd be on the phone with Nira, and probably with Galen as well. The beauty of dealing with people who lived their lives through social connections was that they couldn't help but communicate. Every conversation would create more evidence, more panic, and more opportunities for mistakes. My next stop was Brewster Development's main office, located in a gleaming downtown building that probably cost more to rent than most people's annual salary. I didn't have an appointment, but I'd learned that sometimes the direct approach worked best. "I'm here to see Galen Brewster," I told the receptionist. "It's about the Vossin account." "Do you have an appointment?" "I don't think we'll need much time." 10 minutes later, I was sitting across from Galen Brewster in his corner office, which was decorated with architectural renderings and photos of successful projects. He was exactly what I'd expected: mid-40s, expensive suit, the kind of confident smile that came from years of convincing people to give him money. "Mr. Vossin," he said, extending his hand. I understand you wanted to discuss some kind of account? I didn't shake his hand. I wanted to discuss my wife's investments in your business ventures. His smile became more guarded. I'm not sure I follow. $43,000 over the past 6 months, I said, pulling out a folder of bank statements. Transferred from our joint accounts to cover various expenses related to your waterfront development project. Galen leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from confusion to calculation. Mr. Vossin, I think there may be some confusion here. I don't have any business relationship with your wife. Really? I opened my phone and showed him a photo I'd taken from Nira's social media. This is you and Nira at the Harbor View restaurant 2 weeks ago. She tagged it as a business dinner with local developers. Very professional. He glanced at the photo, and I saw recognition flicker across his face. Ah, yes. Nira mentioned she was married. We've discussed some potential investment opportunities, but nothing formal has been established. Investment opportunities, I repeated. Is that what you call it when you take money from married women to pay your personal expenses? I think this conversation has gone far enough, Galen said, standing up. If you have concerns about your wife's financial decisions, I suggest you discuss them with her. Oh, I have, and she's told me some very interesting things about your business practices. I stood as well, making sure to speak loudly enough for his secretary to hear through the open door. She mentioned that you've been having similar investment discussions with several other women in the area. Penny Hartwell, for example. Galen's face went rigid. I think you should leave. Absolutely. But before I go, I wanted to let you know that I've filed a complaint with the state's Business Licensing Board about unlicensed investment solicitation. I'm sure they'll want to review your client relationships very carefully. I walked toward the door, then turned back. Oh, and Galen? You might want to call Nira. Something tells me she's going to need a lot of emotional support over the next few weeks. As I left the building, I could hear him already reaching for his phone. That evening, I drove to the apartment complex where I'd been living for the past few years. Mrs. Dorrance, the elderly woman who lived across the hall, was checking her mail when I arrived. "Rhett," she said, her voice full of concern. "I heard shouting from your apartment earlier. Is everything all right?" Mrs. Dorrance was the unofficial information hub for our building. She knew everyone's schedules, relationships, and personal business. Normally, I found her nosiness annoying, but today it was exactly what I needed. "Nira and I are going through some difficulties," I said. "She's been having an affair, and we're separating." Mrs. Dorrance's eyes widened with the kind of excitement that only comes from being the first to hear genuinely shocking gossip. An affair? Oh my. With whom? A local businessman named Galen Brewster. Apparently it's been going on for months. That explains the strange cars in the parking garage, she said, nodding sagely. And the late-night arguments. I heard her on the phone yesterday crying about money problems. Perfect. Within 24 hours, everyone in the building would know about Nira's situation, and since several of our neighbors followed her social media accounts, the story would spread far beyond our immediate circle. "I appreciate your discretion," I said, knowing full well that discretion was the last thing Mrs. Dorrance was capable of. "Of course, dear. If you need anything, just let me know, and don't worry. I'm sure everything will work out for the best." As I headed upstairs to collect more of my belongings, I could already hear her on the phone with someone, her voice full of barely contained excitement. By Sunday evening, the social media storm was in full swing. Nira's latest Instagram post, a photo of her morning smoothie with a caption about staying positive during challenging times, had attracted dozens of comments asking about her marriage and her recent absence from her usual social events. Someone had apparently shared screenshots of her location tags from the past few months, showing her frequent visits to expensive restaurants and hotels. Another helpful follower had posted photos from Galen's business events, clearly showing Nira in attendance despite her claims of being focused on fitness and wellness. The comments section was a battlefield of speculation, sympathy, and barely disguised schadenfreude. Her follower count had dropped by nearly 1,000 in 2 days, and several of her sponsors had quietly removed their promotional posts. But the real masterpiece came when someone, I suspected Mrs. Dorrance, shared a video of Nira having a screaming argument with Penny in the gym parking lot. The audio was muffled, but the body language told the whole story. Two women who had been caught in their own web of lies, turning on each other as the walls closed in. I watched the video from my hotel room, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. This was what Nira had chosen over our marriage, a public humiliation that would follow her for years, the loss of the social status she'd worked so hard to build, and the realization that her new friends would abandon her the moment she stopped being useful. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "We need to talk. This has gone far enough. G." I smiled and typed back, "I agree. Let's meet tomorrow and discuss how to resolve this situation like adults." It was time for the final phase of my plan. Galen Brewster chose the meeting location, a coffee shop in the old Port District that was trendy enough to make him feel comfortable, but public enough to prevent any dramatic confrontations. He was already waiting when I arrived, looking less polished than he had in his office. His expensive suit had been replaced with casual clothes, and there were stress lines around his eyes that hadn't been there a few days earlier. "Thank you for coming," he said as I sat down across from him. "I think we can resolve this situation without any more unnecessary drama." "I'm listening," I said, ordering a simple black coffee from the waitress. "Look, I'll be honest with you. Nira and I have developed feelings for each other, but neither of us intended for things to go this far. She's been going through a difficult time in your marriage, and I provided emotional support that maybe crossed some lines." It was a carefully crafted speech, designed to minimize his responsibility while making Nira sound like the instigator. I had to admire his technique. "Emotional support," I repeated. "Is that what cost $43,000? Galen shifted uncomfortably. "Nira insisted on investing in my business ventures. I tried to discourage her, but she was very persistent. She saw it as a way to build financial independence." Financial independence by draining her husband's savings account? "I didn't know the money was coming from joint accounts," he said, which was obviously a lie. "When I found out, I tried to return it, but she refused to take it back." I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a screenshot I'd saved from Nira's backup files. "This is a text message you sent her 3 weeks ago. Tell Rhett the spa treatments are medical expenses. He'll never question health-related charges. Would you like to explain that?" Galen's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I have 6 months of text messages between you and my wife. I also have records of your payments to Penny Hartwell for consulting services, and I have documentation of your financial situation, which suggests you're about 3 months away from bankruptcy." He stared at me for a long moment, then laughed bitterly. "You've been busy." It's amazing what you can learn when you actually pay attention to details. "What do you want?" he asked. "Money? I can't give you back what Nira invested. It's already been spent on legitimate business expenses." "I don't want your money," I said. "I want you to understand the situation you're in." I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "You seduced a married woman, convinced her to embezzle money from her husband, and involved her best friend in a scheme to facilitate adultery for profit. Any one of those things could destroy your business reputation. All 3 together? You'll be lucky if you can get a job selling used cars." "You can't prove any of that," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I don't have to prove it. I just have to share it." I showed him my phone again, this time displaying a draft email. "This is a message to the Portland Business Journal, detailing your business practices and including documentation of your relationship with married investors. I also have a similar email ready for the State Licensing Board and the Better Business Bureau. Galen read the email, his face growing paler with each paragraph. This would ruin me. Yes, it would. Just like your relationship with my wife has ruined my marriage and my financial security. What do you want me to do? I want you to end your relationship with Nira immediately. I want you to stop taking money from married women, and I want you to publicly acknowledge that your business is failing because of your own poor decisions, not because of external factors. And if I do that, you'll delete these emails? I smiled. I'll consider it. Galen sat back in his chair looking defeated. You know, she told me you were weak. She said you were boring and predictable, and that you'd never have the courage to stand up for yourself. She was wrong about a lot of things, I said. But I'm curious, what did she tell you about Penny? His expression shifted to confusion. What about Penny? Did she mention that Penny has been sleeping with you too, or that she's been documenting your relationships for potential blackmail purposes? The color drained from Galen's face completely. That's not... Penny and I are just friends. I pulled out another phone screenshot, this one showing a series of intimate messages between Galen and Penny that had been automatically backed up to Nira's cloud account. Your friend seems to have a very interesting definition of friendship. Galen stared at the messages, his hands shaking slightly. She told me she was helping me understand Nira better. She said she was giving me advice on how to make the relationship work. She was playing both sides, I explained. Taking money from you, taking money from my wife, and collecting information that she could use to protect herself if everything fell apart. This is insane, he muttered. How did everything get so complicated? It got complicated because you decided to build your business model around exploiting married women, I said, and because my wife decided that her personal happiness was more important than basic human decency. I stood up, leaving money on the table for my coffee. You have 24 hours to end things with Nira and Penny. After that, those emails get sent automatically. Wait, he called as I headed for the door. What about Nira? What's going to happen to her? I turned back to look at him one last time. That's not your problem anymore. As I walked out of the coffee shop, I could see Galen frantically typing on his phone, probably trying to reach both Nira and Penny to figure out how much damage control was possible. It was too late for damage control, but I was curious to see how they'd handle the final collapse of their little conspiracy. That evening, I received 3 phone calls in rapid succession. The first was from Penny, her voice shaking with barely controlled panic. Rhett, I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. I need to explain some things to you. I don't think that's necessary, I said. I understand the situation perfectly. No, you don't. Nira asked me to help her figure out what was wrong with your marriage. She was worried that you were having an affair, and she wanted me to investigate. It was a creative lie, but completely inconsistent with the evidence I'd collected. Penny, I have copies of every payment Nira made to your consulting business. I also have text messages between you and Galen discussing how to keep your relationship secret. Would you like me to read them to you? The line went quiet for a long moment. Then, what do you want? I want you to stay away from my wife and stop pretending to be a marriage counselor. You're not qualified to give relationship advice, and you're certainly not qualified to take money for facilitating adultery. I never meant for things to go this far, she said, starting to cry. It was just supposed to be a way to help Nira feel more confident and independent. By encouraging her to have an affair and drain our bank accounts? I didn't know about the money, she insisted. Galen told me that Nira was investing in his business as a legitimate partner. Penny, you documented everything. You have records of every meeting, every payment, every conversation. You knew exactly what was happening because you were orchestrating it. She hung up without saying goodbye. The second call was from Nira, her voice alternating between fury and desperation. What did you say to Galen? He's acting like he's never met me before. I told him the truth about his situation, I said. Apparently, he didn't like what he heard. You had no right to interfere in my relationships, she screamed. Galen and I are adults and we can make our own decisions. You're absolutely right, and I've made my own decisions too. How do you like your new apartment? It's a dump, she spat. 1 bedroom, no parking, and the neighbors are loud and obnoxious. It's what you can afford on your own income, I pointed out. I thought you wanted independence. I want my life back, she said, her voice breaking. I want my home, my friends, my social media followers. I want things to go back to the way they were. That's not possible. You made choices that have consequences. I'll fight this, she said. I'll get a lawyer and take you for everything you're worth. Good luck with that. Make sure to mention the adultery and the embezzlement when you meet with your attorney. I'm sure they'll be very interested in your legal position. She hung up after calling me several names that would have made her yoga instructor very disappointed. The third call was the most interesting. It came from a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was familiar. Mr. Vossin, this is Detective Sarah Mitchell with the Portland Police Department. I understand you filed some complaints about financial irregularities involving your wife and a local businessman. I hadn't filed any police complaints, but apparently someone else had. I'm not sure what you're referring to, Detective. We've received reports about possible fraud and embezzlement involving unlicensed investment schemes. Your name came up as a potential victim. Would you be willing to come in and discuss the situation? Of course, I said. When would be convenient? How about tomorrow morning? And Mr. Vossin, you might want to bring any documentation you have about financial transactions between your wife and Galen Brewster. After I hung up, I sat in my hotel room and tried to process what had just happened. Someone, probably Penny, trying to save herself, had contacted the police about Galen's business practices. The investigation I'd been conducting privately was about to become very public and very official. I opened my laptop and began organizing the evidence I'd collected over the past week. Bank statements, text messages, business records, social media posts, everything that documented the conspiracy between Nira, Galen, and Penny. Tomorrow, I would hand it all over to the police and let the legal system take over. But tonight, I wanted to enjoy the satisfaction of knowing that my methodical, patient approach had worked exactly as planned. Sometimes the best revenge wasn't dramatic or violent. Sometimes it was simply letting people face the natural consequences of their own choices. Detective Sarah Mitchell was exactly what I'd expected from a veteran investigator. Sharp eyes, no-nonsense demeanor, and the kind of patience that came from years of listening to people's lies and excuses. Her office at the Portland Police Department was small but organized, with files stacked neatly and a coffee maker that looked like it had seen better decades. Mr. Vossin, she said, as I sat down across from her desk. I appreciate you coming in. We've been investigating reports of investment fraud involving Galen Brewster's development company, and your situation appears to be connected. I'm happy to help however I can, I said, placing a thick folder on her desk. I've documented everything I could find about the financial transactions between my wife and Mr. Brewster. Detective Mitchell opened the folder and began reviewing the contents. Bank statements, printed text messages, business registration documents, and a detailed timeline I'd created showing the progression of the affair and the money transfers. This is very thorough, she said after several minutes. How long have you been investigating this? About 2 weeks since I discovered my wife's second phone. Once I realized what was happening, I approached it like any other logistics problem. Gather data, analyze patterns, and follow the evidence to its logical conclusion. And what conclusion did you reach? That my wife was being manipulated by a man who specializes in convincing women to give him money for fake business ventures. But I also concluded that she was a willing participant who knew exactly what she was doing. Detective Mitchell nodded. We've received similar complaints from 3 other women in the past month. All of them were married. All of them invested significant amounts of money in Brewster's projects. And all of them discovered that their investments were actually being used to pay his personal expenses. "What about Penny Hartwell?" I asked. She was facilitating these relationships through her consulting business. "Ms. Hartwell contacted us yesterday. She claims she was unaware of the fraudulent nature of Mr. Brewster's business and is willing to cooperate with our investigation." I smiled grimly. Penny always was good at saving herself. "Based on the evidence you've provided, we'll be filing charges against Mr. Brewster for investment fraud and unlicensed financial solicitation. As for your wife, that's more complicated." "How so?" "She was technically authorized to access your joint accounts, so the embezzlement charges would be difficult to prove. However, if she was aware that Brewster's business was fraudulent, she could be considered a co-conspirator." "What happens next?" Detective Mitchell closed the folder. "We'll need you to provide a formal statement, and you may be called to testify if this goes to trial. In the meantime, I'd suggest you continue documenting any contact between your wife and Mr. Brewster." "I don't think that will be necessary," I said. "I believe their relationship is about to end very abruptly." As I left the police station, I felt a strange sense of closure. The legal system would handle Galen's business crimes, but the personal betrayal required a different kind of justice. That evening, I returned to our apartment building for the first time since Nira had been forced to move out. Mrs. Dorrance was waiting in the lobby, practically vibrating with excitement. "Rhett," she said, rushing over to me. "I'm so glad you're back. You won't believe what's been happening." "Tell me everything," I said, genuinely curious about how the story had evolved in my absence. "Well, first, that awful woman Penny came by looking for Nira. She was crying and carrying on about how everything was ruined. I told her Nira didn't live here anymore, and she actually had the nerve to ask for your contact information. I hope you didn't give it to her." "Of course not." But then, about an hour later, that man Galen showed up. He was furious, demanding to know where Nira had moved. When I told him I didn't know, he started shouting about how she'd destroyed his business and ruined his reputation. Mrs. Dorrance paused dramatically. "Then the police came." "The police?" "Someone called them about a disturbance. Galen was in the parking garage, trying to break into what he thought was Nira's car. Turns out it belonged to Mr. Chen from the 3rd floor. They arrested him for attempted vehicle theft." I couldn't help but laugh. "What about Nira? Have you seen her?" "She came by yesterday with some moving truck, trying to get into the apartment. She had a locksmith with her, but I told them the lease had been terminated, and she had no legal right to be here. She screamed at me for 20 minutes before security made her leave." "Where is she staying now?" Mrs. Dorrance leaned in conspiratorially. "I heard from Gladys at the grocery store that she's been staying at that cheap motel on Forest Avenue. Apparently, she can't afford a real apartment without access to your bank accounts." The image of Nira, with her designer clothes and expensive tastes, living in a budget motel was both satisfying and pathetic, but it was the natural consequence of her choices. "There's something else," Mrs. Dorrance continued. "I've been following her social media account, and it's been quite entertaining. She posted a long message yesterday about toxic people and financial abuse, but most of the comments were from people calling her out for cheating on you." "People know about the affair?" "Oh, honey, everyone knows. That video of her fighting with Penny in the gym parking lot has been shared hundreds of times, and someone posted screenshots of her text messages with that Galen fellow. Very embarrassing stuff." I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Nira's carefully constructed public image was completely destroyed, and unlike our marriage, that kind of reputation damage couldn't be repaired. "I should go," I said. "Thank you for keeping me informed." "Of course, dear. And Rhett? I'm proud of how you handled this situation. A lot of men would have done something stupid, but you were smart about it." As I rode the elevator up to my floor, I reflected on Mrs. Dorrance's words. I had been smart about it, approaching the problem methodically rather than emotionally. But more importantly, I'd let Nira, Galen, and Penny destroy themselves through their own actions rather than trying to force a confrontation. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "This is all your fault. You've ruined everything for everyone. I hope you're satisfied." I recognized Nira's writing style, even though she was apparently using yet another phone. I typed back, "I didn't ruin anything. I just stopped enabling your choices." "I loved him," she replied. "We could have been happy if you hadn't interfered." "You loved the idea of him," I corrected, "and he loved your bank account. Neither of those things was real." "You don't understand what real love is," she texted back. "You never did. That's why I had to find it somewhere else." I stared at that message for a long time, trying to feel some kind of emotion about it. Anger, sadness, regret, anything that would indicate our 6-year marriage had meant something, but all I felt was tired. "You're right," I finally typed back. "I don't understand the kind of love that requires lying, stealing, and betraying the people who trust you. I hope you and Galen can figure out how to love each other without anyone else's money." "Galen won't even talk to me anymore," she replied. "He says I'm too much trouble and that being with me could hurt his legal case." "That sounds about right," I said. "Good luck, Nira. I hope you find what you're looking for." I blocked the number and deleted the conversation. There was nothing left to say. 3 days later, I received a call from Detective Mitchell with an update on the investigation. "We've arrested Galen Brewster on multiple charges of investment fraud," she said. "He's also facing charges for the attempted car theft at your building. Ms. Hartwell has agreed to testify against him in exchange for immunity." "What about the other victims?" "We've identified 5 women total, including your wife. The total amount of fraudulent investments is approaching $200,000. Will any of them get their money back?" "Unlikely. Brewster spent most of it on personal expenses and gambling debts. His development company is bankrupt, and his personal assets are minimal." "And Nira?" "She's not being charged, but she's also not getting any money back. The district attorney considers her a victim, albeit one who should have been more careful about her investment decisions." After I hung up, I sat in my new apartment, a modest 1-bedroom place that I could afford on my salary alone, and tried to process the end of this chapter of my life. Galen was going to prison for fraud. Penny had lost her business and most of her social connections. Nira was living in a motel, blacklisted from her former social circles, and facing the reality of supporting herself without access to someone else's money. None of them had gotten what they thought they wanted. None of them had found the happiness or success they'd been chasing. And none of them seemed to understand that their problems were the direct result of their own choices. I opened my laptop and began working on my resume. It was time to look for a new job, maybe in a different city, somewhere I could start fresh without the constant reminders of my failed marriage. But first, I had one more task to complete. I opened a new document and began typing. "The Last Withdrawal, a true story of marriage, money, and revenge." If Nira wanted to tell her version of events on social media, I was going to make sure the real story was available too. Not out of spite or anger, but because the truth deserved to be documented. And because sometimes the best revenge is simply letting people see exactly who they really are. 6 months later, I was sitting in Rory's tavern, celebrating my new job with Kip and a few other friends from work. I'd been hired as a logistics coordinator for a shipping company in Burlington, Vermont. Better pay, better benefits, and most importantly, no connection to my previous life in Portland. "So, when do you start the new position?" Kip asked, raising his beer in a toast. 2 weeks, I said. "Just enough time to finish packing and tie up loose ends here." "Any regrets about leaving?" I considered the question seriously. "None. Portland holds too many memories, and not the good kind." Rory wiped down the bar and joined our conversation. "Speaking of memories, did you hear about your ex-wife's latest adventure?" I hadn't been following Nira's activities since our divorce was finalized 3 months earlier, but Rory seemed to enjoy keeping me updated on the local gossip. "What happened now?" She got arrested last week for writing bad checks. Apparently she's been bouncing payments all over town. Rent, utilities, even her grocery bills. Kip shook his head. How does someone go from living in an upscale apartment to writing bad checks in 6 months? Poor financial planning, I said, and an inability to adjust expectations to match reality. There's more, Rory continued. Remember that fancy gym where she used to work out? They're suing her for unpaid personal training fees. Turns out she racked up about $3,000 in charges after her membership was canceled. What about Penny? I asked. Last I heard, she was trying to rebuild her reputation. Penny moved to Florida, Rory said. Apparently her family got tired of the scandal and convinced her to start over somewhere else. She's working at a chain gym now, teaching basic aerobics classes. And Galen? Sentenced to 4 years for investment fraud. He'll probably serve about half of that if he behaves himself. I finished my beer and reflected on how completely everyone's lives had changed. A year ago, Nira had been a successful social media influencer with a comfortable lifestyle and a wide circle of friends. Penny had been running a profitable consulting business. Galen had been developing luxury properties and living in an expensive townhouse. Now all three of them were facing the consequences of their choices, and none of them had anyone to blame but themselves. You know what the strangest part is? I said to Kip as we prepared to leave. I don't feel angry anymore. I don't even feel satisfied about their problems. I just feel relieved. Relieved? Relieved that I found out who they really were before they could do even more damage. Relieved that I handled the situation legally and ethically instead of doing something I'd regret. And relieved that I'm finally free to build a life with people who actually deserve my trust. As we walked out of the bar, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. For a moment, I wondered if Nira had gotten another phone and was trying to contact me again. But when I opened the message, it was from someone completely unexpected. Mr. Vossin, this is Jennifer Walsh from Channel 8 News. We're doing a story about investment fraud in the Portland area, and we'd like to interview you about your experience with Galen Brewster's scheme. Would you be willing to speak with us? I showed the message to Kip. What do you think? Should I do it? Why not? Maybe your story will help other people avoid getting scammed. That evening, I met with Jennifer Walsh at a coffee shop downtown. She was a young reporter who specialized in consumer protection stories, and she'd been investigating Galen's business practices for several weeks. What made you suspicious of Mr. Brewster's relationship with your wife? She asked, setting up a small recording device between us. The timing of her spending patterns, I said. Large withdrawals always happened right before she claimed to have social events or business meetings. It was too consistent to be coincidental. How did you gather evidence without violating her privacy? I only used information I had legal access to: joint bank accounts, shared cloud storage, and public social media posts. I never hacked into her personal devices or accessed private communications without authorization. What would you tell other people who might be in similar situations? I thought about that question carefully. Pay attention to changes in spending patterns, especially if your spouse suddenly becomes secretive about money. Trust your instincts if something feels wrong, and document everything before confronting anyone. Emotions run high in these situations, but evidence doesn't lie. Do you have any sympathy for your ex-wife, given that she was also a victim of Mr. Brewster's fraud? She was a victim of his fraud, but she was also a willing participant in betraying our marriage, I said. I can feel sorry for her financial losses without excusing her personal choices. The interview lasted about an hour, and Jennifer seemed satisfied with the information I'd provided. She mentioned that the story would air the following week as part of a series about protecting yourself from investment scams. As I drove home to my apartment, I realized that talking about the experience publicly felt like a final step in moving forward. For months, I'd been carrying the weight of what had happened, processing the betrayal and the anger and the disappointment. Now, I was ready to let it go. The next morning, I received a phone call that I'd been expecting for weeks. Rhett, this is David Chen, Nira's attorney. I'm calling about the final property settlement from your divorce. I thought everything had been resolved, I said. There's one remaining issue. Nira is requesting access to some personal items that were in your shared storage unit. Family photos, some jewelry that belonged to her grandmother, things with sentimental value. I'd been wondering when this would come up. When I'd moved Nira's belongings out of our apartment, I'd been careful to separate her personal items from our shared possessions. But there were some things, photos from our early relationship, gifts we'd given each other, mementos from trips we'd taken together, that existed in a gray area. She can have anything that's genuinely hers, I said, but I want to be present when she goes through the storage unit. That's reasonable. Would this Saturday work for you? Saturday morning, I met Nira and her attorney at the storage facility. It was the first time I'd seen her in person since our divorce proceedings, and the change was startling. The polished, perfectly groomed woman I'd married was gone. Nira looked tired and stressed, wearing clothes that were clean but clearly not expensive. Her hair was shorter and less styled, and she wasn't wearing the kind of makeup that had been part of her daily routine for years. "Hello, Rhett," she said quietly as we walked toward the storage unit. "Nira," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. Her attorney opened the unit, revealing boxes of clothes, furniture, and personal items that represented 6 years of shared life. Nira began going through the boxes methodically, separating items that were clearly hers from things that had belonged to both of us. "Can I take this?" she asked, holding up a framed photo of us from our honeymoon in Italy. I looked at the picture. 2 people who had been genuinely happy, at least in that moment, and felt a wave of sadness for what we'd lost. "Keep it," I said. "I have copies of the photos I want to remember." She continued sorting through boxes, occasionally asking about specific items. Most of the time, I told her to take whatever she wanted. Material possessions weren't worth fighting over, especially when the relationship they represented was already gone. "Rhett," she said after about an hour, "I know this doesn't change anything, but I want you to know that I'm sorry. Not just about the money, but about everything. I made terrible choices, and I hurt someone who didn't deserve it." I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or self-pity, but she seemed genuinely remorseful. "I appreciate that," I said. "But apologies don't undo consequences. You made decisions that destroyed our marriage and damaged a lot of other people's lives." "I know, and I'm trying to rebuild my life in a way that doesn't hurt anyone else." "How's that going?" She smiled sadly. "It's harder than I expected. Turns out, living honestly requires skills I never developed. It's never too late to learn." "Maybe. I'm working 2 jobs now, retail during the day, cleaning offices at night. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work that I can afford." "That's a start." She finished sorting through her belongings, loading several boxes into a small rental truck. As she prepared to leave, she turned back to me one last time. "For what it's worth, you handled this situation better than I would have. You had every right to be vindictive, but you weren't. You just let me face the consequences of my own choices." "That's all any of us can do," I said. "Face the consequences and try to make better choices going forward." After she left, I stood in the nearly empty storage unit, looking at the few remaining boxes that contained the remnants of our shared life. Photo albums, wedding gifts, furniture we'd bought together. Things that had once seemed important, but now felt like artifacts from someone else's life. I loaded the remaining boxes into my car and drove to a donation center. Someone else could find value in these objects, give them new meaning in a different context. The following week, Jennifer Walsh's news story aired on Channel 8. It was a well-researched piece that explained how investment fraud schemes target vulnerable people and provided practical advice for protecting yourself from scammers. My interview was featured prominently, along with interviews from 2 other victims of Galen's scheme. The story also included footage of Galen being led away in handcuffs and a brief statement from the district attorney about the importance of reporting financial crimes. But the most interesting part was a brief interview with Penny, who had apparently agreed to speak with the reporter by phone from Florida. "I thought I was helping people," she said, her voice barely audible over the connection. "I convinced myself that I was providing a valuable service, helping women find confidence and independence. But really, I was just enabling a criminal and profiting from other people's pain." The story generated significant local interest and was picked up by several other news outlets. I received dozens of messages from people who had experienced similar situations or who wanted to thank me for speaking publicly about financial fraud. But the most meaningful response came from an unexpected source: my former neighbor, Mrs. Dorrance. "Rhett," she said when she called me the day after the story aired, "I just wanted to tell you how proud I am of you. You turned a terrible situation into something that might help other people avoid the same problems." "Thank you, Mrs. Dorrance. That means a lot. And I have some news that might interest you. The apartment next to yours has new tenants, a lovely young couple with a baby. Very quiet, very respectful. Much better than your previous situation." I laughed. "I'm sure they are. They asked about you, actually. I told them you were a good man who handled a difficult situation with dignity. If you ever want to visit, I think they'd like to meet you." "I appreciate that, but I'm moving to Vermont next week. New job, fresh start." "That sounds wonderful. You deserve happiness, dear." After I hung up, I finished packing the last of my belongings. Tomorrow, the movers would load everything into a truck, and I'd drive north to begin the next chapter of my life. I'd learned important lessons over the past year about trust, betrayal, and the importance of paying attention to warning signs. But more importantly, I'd learned that the best response to other people's bad choices isn't revenge or retaliation. It's simply refusing to enable those choices and protecting yourself from their consequences. As I closed the last box and labeled it for the move, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: genuine excitement about the future. Nira had chosen to prioritize short-term pleasure over long-term stability, and now she was working 2 jobs to pay for basic necessities. Galen had chosen to build his business on fraud and manipulation, and now he was serving time in federal prison. Penny had chosen to profit from other people's relationship problems, and now she was starting over in a different state with a damaged reputation. I had chosen to respond to their betrayal with patience, documentation, and legal